Народной Республики Донбасс обратились к России с просьбой о помощи. Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
These words from Putin on February 24th, announcing a special military operation against Ukraine, sent shockwaves across the world. The Russian president launched the biggest attack by one state against another in Europe since World War II. It has been over 2 years now since this speech, and while the war rages on, its impact has not been confined to the two countries and has had widespread ripple effects. One such ripple has managed to touch the city of temples and textiles in Tamil Nadu, Tiruppur. Why? Because Tiruppur is a massive exporter of textiles. The knitwear capital has a share of more than 50% in India's export of knitwear-based apparel products. Fun fact, it was also called the dollar town because of its export potential and export share. Now, the war has led to a surge in energy costs and curtailed consumption in Tiruppur's export markets in the West, which also, by the way, have been hit by inflation. Add to that the industry's local problems like the lack of adequate government support, stiff competition from neighboring countries, and high yarn prices, and you begin to get a sense of just how grave the situation is. So people are losing jobs, and ancillary industries in the city are suffering. The familiar hum of machines is slowly getting softer, and the odor of chemicals used in dyes is fast fading. Companies are relocating or worse, shutting down. So what really went wrong? Why is it that Tiruppur is grappling with a multitude of issues today? Why are companies shuttering? Is this a Tiruppur problem, or is it one that the textile industry at large is facing? Is the government's target of touching $100 billion in textile export by 2030 realistic? Can we catch up with competitors like Bangladesh? What is it that these countries are doing right? In this episode, I try to get you answers to all of this right from the lifeline of the city, the textile factories. I traveled to Tiruppur and spoke to textile workers, mill owners, and industry body representatives. I also get you the voice of an experienced textile industry analyst who breaks down all that's happening in Tiruppur. So stay tuned. It's Friday, the 24th of May. I'm your host, Diya Rekhi, and you are listening to Weaving Woes, Why Are Tiruppur's Textile Mills Shutting Down? Only on the morning brief from the Economic Times. Tiruppur is just 50 kilometers from Coimbatore. The textile cluster pretty much came up organically on what was once an agricultural town. The farmers there started with small textile units during the 1970s, which gradually grew into a web of small to mid-sized units. People began to move away from agriculture to undertake the small-scale manufacturing of briefs and vests. And just FYI, I read this interesting nugget of information while researching for this episode that I wanted to share with you. Apparently, the high mineral content in the local water, which was considered the bane of agriculture, played a big role in Tiruppur's success in textiles. Clothes bleached with the local water came out whiter. This was, of course, before the arrival and extensive use of chemicals like chlorine in bleaching. And that's how Tiruppur made a name for itself in the grey and white briefs and vests market. Who would have thought, right? For years, Tiruppur has exported cotton and cotton blend t-shirts, dresses, sweatshirts, and other knitted clothes to the US, Europe, Australia, and Canada. Startups like Campus Sutra started their first factories here. It has a large, rich business legacy, and today all of that is in serious jeopardy. On my recent visit to Tiruppur, I had a chance to sit down with the president of its Exporters and Manufacturer Association, MP Muthuratnam, to discuss how bad the situation really is. The conversation has been translated into English for ease of understanding. Sir, could we begin with understanding a little bit about why businesses in Tiruppur are shutting down?
For 6 to 7 years, business has been very dull. The main raw material is cotton, where demand price is artificially controlled. Due to this, since 2021, it's been called white gold, and the price fluctuates every day like gold prices. The Cotton Corporation of India sells it in bulk. Instead of spinners, middlemen get in and buy like an investment. They create demand artificially and then sell the raw material when needed. It's becoming like gambling. Secondly, the central government has levied 11% tax on cotton imports. That should be removed.
If you could give us a number, how many businesses have really shut shop in recent times?
I can say 50% of businesses have closed in Tiruppur. Most of the remaining ones are barely surviving. There are 10% who run as corporates that are doing well. The remaining seem to be like they are in a comatose stage. In our association, we have around 1400 members. Around 500 to 600 are alive, and the rest have closed. Over 50% have completely shut shop.
And what is the kind of impact that all of this has had on your revenues?
In 21-22, we did 35,000 crore rupees. It's become 30,000 crore rupees now. It's fallen. There is a dollar rate also where the rupee has depreciated.
So, sir, how would you say the government has responded to this crisis? Have they provided Tiruppur with a helping hand?
If a corporate company is running a loss, the government gives SOPs. But here the government doesn't give any support or help in revival. Even the state government is not helpful. They don't have the mindset to safeguard our business. Over 50% of spinning mills of the country are in Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is number one in textiles. But the state government has no knowledge to retain that position. If they had it, they wouldn't have increased EB charges. They welcome foreign industries but don't care about domestic businesses. People are moving to Odisha, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. Tiruppur is 100% dependent on apparel, unlike Coimbatore, Erode, or Karur, that have engineering, medicine, or agriculture. If this is not there for us, the livelihood of 15 lakh people will become a question mark.
Next, I met Raja M. Shanmugam, the president of the Tiruppur Exporters Association, and here's what he had to say.
Right now, this industry for the past 2 years is reeling under tough time because of the global political compulsions. You know that as soon as the war erupted between Russia and Ukraine, the problem starts for Tiruppur cluster. Directly, we are the victim. The predominant market is Russia and America because almost 80% of our production goes to Europe as well as for America. So approximately 40 to 45% to Europe and 35% to America.
Shanmugam told me that the war and recession in the West has badly impacted Tiruppur's textile industry.
The garment purchase in European market by the people has gone down drastically because they want to fend themselves with all the necessities. So the area of necessity, the clothing comes last. So automatically what happened is that the order procurement suddenly dropped down. And we all were thinking that it all would be a short time. Russia would conquer Ukraine thoroughly, and thereby the war itself would come to an end. But it didn't happen. Unfortunately, this is the biggest threat we have faced in our lifetime. This crisis has become a a continuous elongated one, where the survival has become so doubtful for MSMEs because this cluster, this industry is predominantly occupied by MSMEs. So MSMEs don't have much of wherewithal to sustain these kind of unexpected crisis and unexpected hit. And you know that each entities do have their recurring expenses, overheads. And the overheads could be met only if an entity crosses around 60 to 70% of the capacity. Then only it will earn over and above the profit horizon starts. And now we are well below 60%. So you imagine the plight of the MSME. Many have shut down for very many reasons. Recent past because electricity tariff has increased exorbitantly by Tamil Nadu government. So which again hit the MSMEs directly.
Meanwhile, costs have been going up, especially electricity bills. Under revised calculations, Shanmugam says factory owners have to pay higher tariffs even if their factories are closed temporarily.
So I have to pay around 50,000 rupees, irrespective of whether you use it or not. So you imagine that my overheads already is eating me. And even in that condition, if I happen to pay for the tangent cost additional charge, where do I go?
The textile industry faces constant global competition, with new centers emerging even within India, such as Orissa. To stay competitive, businesses need to sharpen their edge and strengthen their positioning both domestically and internationally. Policy support like FDA-type initiatives is crucial and can be facilitated by the Government of India to benefit the entire country. For example, countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka have advantageous trade agreements that allow their products to be imported at zero tariffs, putting India at a disadvantage. This gap needs to be addressed by the government. However, the responsibility to compete effectively lies with the businesses themselves. While the government can provide support, it's up to businesses to enhance their brand positioning through superior service and product quality. India's government gave the textile industry a 16,920 crore rupee loan under the Emergency Credit Line Guarantee Scheme post-COVID. But citing an aggravation of the crisis, falling demand, and low capacity utilizations, the Confederation of Indian Textile Industry, or CITI, sought an extension of the one-year moratorium for repayment of the principal amount and also asked for a conversion of 3-year loans under the Emergency Credit Line Guarantee Scheme into 6-year term loans.
So this request I have made to Finance Minister, and so far no positive response has been seen. So because this election is going around, and I wish that the new government, once it's formulated in the month of June, wish that seriously it has to be taken into account, and they have to give some solace in this manner to ensure the existence of the MSMEs.
This isn't just a Tiruppur problem though. The textile industry at large in India has been going through some very trying times. It's a systemic problem, and to shed more light on it and talk about possible solutions, here's Nilesh Hundikari, a partner in the consumer and retail practice at Kearney. Listen in.
Tiruppur is probably one of the more efficient clusters in the country, but it suffers from the same problems that the rest of the Indian apparel industry suffers from. So we have challenges in terms of cost, we have challenges in terms of speed, and we have challenges in terms of scale. And these problems are much more in the synthetic garments or man-made fabric garments than cotton garments. Now, globally, 2/3 of the garments consumed in the world are made from man-made fibers. Okay, 1/3 are from cotton fibers, from natural fibers. Whereas Indian garment manufacturing industry is mostly concentrated in the cotton segment. When I say we have a cost disadvantage, this cost disadvantage gets much more magnified in the synthetic fabric arena, where, for example, if you were to manufacture a polyester shirt in India and you compare that with the Bangladesh, there will almost be a 18-20% disadvantage in terms of cost. Second, if it comes to speed, so there also we have challenges. Other countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, they have kind of perfected that where they're able to meet the service levels. They are reasonable. They are almost best in class in that area. We also face problems in terms of scale. The largest garment manufacturers in India will have plants which are about 2,000 workers, whereas in countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, China, you will have plants which easily have 20,000 workers at one place. So that gives the significant advantage in terms of overheads. Particularly when it comes to synthetics, there's a much bigger challenge. We don't have the kind of yarn or fabric required to make the garments. So when you import them, they become very expensive because of the duties on them. So all these problems are actually pretty common across the entire country. They are not restricted to Tiruppur.
So then would you say overall textile exports have been impacted? And what about Tiruppur's exports? Where do they stand?
So that our exports are about $35 billion in this year. The government's target actually was $100 billion by 2026. When we had done a study, we looked at past data and we said that target is pretty ambitious. But even a target of $65 billion was what the industry wanted to do. Even that is not happening. And there's been a slight decline compared to last year. And almost 42% of this is apparel, which has also reduced by almost 10% compared to the previous year.
Right.
And you were asking about Tiruppur. It's now about $3 billion, and it was about $4 billion 2 years ago.
It's interesting you mentioned Bangladesh, because I wanted to get a sense of what exactly is Bangladesh doing differently or better, which has put them in this spot, or have they always been traditionally at an advantage as opposed to India?
Bangladesh has benefited from having a low-cost labor and reasonably disciplined way of working, and they made this a national priority. It's the single largest industry in Bangladesh. Now, there are a couple of 2-3 factors that help them. Their labor is cheaper, and you can go to the cheapest place in India. Bangladesh will be cheaper than that by almost about 20%. Secondly, a worker in Bangladesh will produce, if they produce 12 garments in an hour, will produce 10 garments. The underlying reasons for that is that in Bangladesh, a worker on average is allowed to work 12 hours a day. That much of overtime is allowed. In India, the overtime allowed is about 50 hours in a quarter. That comes to almost 1 hour per day. Bangladesh has free trade agreements with the United Kingdom and European Union, which we don't have. Now, many state governments in India are actually promising a subsidy to manufacturers, which is expected to bridge this gap. However, there is always a concern on part of a manufacturer on 2 accounts. Number one, will I get this subsidy in time because I have to incur a cost today? And plus, there is always also concern with government policies that if the government in a state government changes, and what if they reverse that policy? So we don't have a cost advantage at all. Bangladesh has a clear cost advantage. Therefore, we will always be reduced to a very small share of the world market.
Right. Among the clusters that are the larger clusters where you've clubbed Tiruppur, right? Which of the clusters are doing better? Maybe not well, but which of them are doing better? Would you say that Tiruppur is among those, or are there others who are doing better?
No, nobody's doing better. In fact, others have similar problems also. Bangalore, for example, is a high-cost wage island. Delhi and the NCR region, it's high-cost wage island. It's around Mumbai. These are all high-wage cost locations to begin with. They're not the ideal locations for garment manufacturing in the first place. Garment manufacturing needs to be in the lowest wage cost in the country. So it should be in places like Orissa, it should be in Madhya Pradesh, it should be in Jharkhand, it should be in Bihar, it should be in Uttar Pradesh. So these are areas where a lot of migrant labor actually is going from these states, the other states are the west and the south, and even the north. This industry has the potential of creating employment in these states, but these states are not necessarily the most industrially developed and forward. So they're marketing themselves. The right kind of industrial culture also takes time to get established in these states.
You've mentioned that this is an industry with tremendous potential, but somehow has not been able to sort of really fulfill that potential that it offers. So, what more can the government do to really push this sector? Because we're seeing that the government is being very aggressive when it comes to certain sectors, like, say, electronics manufacturing. What more is needed in the textile and apparel segment?
So there are few things that can be done. The government launched the PLI scheme, the Production Linked Incentive Scheme. However, what we hear from the industry is that the terms and conditions of the scheme are pretty steep. So investors were finding them hard to meet, which means that perhaps there is a need to relook at the provisions of that scheme and launch a revised version of that scheme, which will help offset some of the factor cost disadvantages that a manufacturer would face if they were to operate in India. But the second scheme is the PM Mitra Park, which is an integrated textile park, which envisions that the whole value chain will be in one place inside the park, and it will have hostels and dormitories for workers, and it will have right from the fabric manufacturing to garment manufacturing to finishing, everything would be there in one place. It's a good idea that to have one-stop shop or a plug-and-play facilities in one place. But some of that the economics of that also needs to work out for people, because this is an industry which is a very price sensitive industry. When it comes to textiles, again, I'm saying fabric manufacturing, it's a very capital intensive industry. The cost of capital is very high. There, the companies in India, because their returns on their existing plants themselves are not very high, they're not putting in more money into this industry. So it's a more fundamental problem. It's not a question of whether they'll put the money in a PM Mitra Park. They're not putting money in their own facilities wherever they are. There is also a concern on the labor laws. Just having 20,000 people in one place is just a huge industrial relations risk, which nobody will want to take, least of all in a low margin industry like this. So for that, labor law liberalization needs to happen. Some of the new labor codes have been released, but they've not yet been actioned or implemented in some of the states. But then things like a fixed term employment, it's almost an assurance to the manufacturer that industrial relations problems will not threaten them, will not disrupt their operations is needed. Unless all of those things happen, new investment will not happen, or it might happen in bits, and it will be a trickle. It will not pour in. Some of these are, I would say, the cherry on top. They're not the cake itself.
At a time when everyone is talking about Make in India, some sectors seem to be stealing the limelight. Like electronics manufacturing, for instance, which is all the rage right now, with everyone from the Tatas to the Murugappas to smaller players like Suchi Semicon setting up facilities to make the most of the great potential that this space offers. Textiles somehow have not seen the same amount of traction, even though the sector is a huge employer, and as Nilesh said, we have barely scratched the surface of the kind of massive potential that the space holds. For clusters like Tiruppur, which already have their networks in place, it is concerning to see so many companies shut shop, because it isn't just them, but the ancillary industries that suffer as a result too. For example, I met someone in Tiruppur who has been selling cleaning supplies to factories for over 2 decades now. And he said that his business was hurting because so many of these factories have been shuttered. The entrepreneurs I met are hopeful that once the new government comes to power, they will accord the sector with the importance it deserves, and also will help revive the sector. Whether that will happen or not is something that will probably be answered in the budget. But for now, Tiruppur is hurting. But who is going to help relieve the pain? Thank you, Mr. Muthuratnam, Raja, and Nilesh. It's Friday, May 24th. I'm your host, Diya Rekhi, and you were listening to Weaving Woes, Why Are Tiruppur's Textile Mills Shutting Down? Only on the Morning Brief from the Economic Times. This episode was produced by Neil Ghai and Surohini Jain, sound editor Indraneel Bhattacharjee, executive producers Anirban Chaudhary and Arijit Burman. The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Tune in to ET Play for all audio content. You can also listen to our podcast on all major podcast streaming platforms. Thank you for listening and have a great weekend. All external sound clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.